Seeds of Change. The Shady Seed Company was world famous for their high-quality heritage garden seeds. Everyone knew if you planted shady seeds, you'd get the highest yield of the best quality of fruit and vegetables you've ever seen, even in shorter seasons of sunlight. Times were good for the Shady family, especially because shifting world weather patterns were resulting in shorter growing seasons, and predictions of food shortages around the globe were becoming a reality. More and more people wanted shady seeds, and business was booming. During this blooming boom, Sheldon Shady IV inherited the reins of the family company. And he had a very different view of business than his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had before him. All the other Sheldons believed that keeping prices reasonable would keep their business growing, and generations of growth was the result. "Fools!" squealed number 4 as he addressed his very first board meeting. "Now's the time to capitalize on capitalism." He chuckled as he told the secretary, "You can write that one down. People will pay whatever we charge them." And he was right. For a while, anyway, until weather patterns shifted again, as they tend to do. Longer growing seasons accommodated cheaper seeds. Oh, the yields weren't as bountiful as shady yields, but they were far less expensive. So priced out of the market and hated for their price gouging, shady seeds failed into foreclosure. One spring morning, a watchful young entrepreneur, James Jacoby, was looking over market trends, and something important caught his eye. Some deeper research showed subtle signs that world weather patterns were shifting. As a matter of reasonable fact, the next growing season could be the shortest in over 40 years. As he considered how this could affect the market, and even the world, he looked back into history for a precedent. And sure enough, the same thing happened 42 years earlier, and the effects were dramatic. There was some mention of a Shady Seed Company in the articles, and he was intrigued that they blossomed during the downturn until they collapsed. He wondered if there was anything left of it, so he made some calls and found there was a Sheldon Shady IV living in a small condo about 2 hours away. The two men met, and after talking for a while, Shady was thrilled to sell his almost worthless stock, a rundown warehouse on some land nearby, and tons of leftover seeds for the price of a few of James' last flip houses. James quickly got the warehouse fixed up and hired 3 sharp marketing people to try and revive this dinosaur. He decided to keep the Shady name, even though it was a bit, He figured that 3 generations of excellence could overcome one of greed. He challenged his marketing people that it was going to take something bold to restart this old brand. He proposed a contest between them. The winner would become the vice president of marketing, with better pay, perks, and parking. The company had a fair amount of land around the warehouse for growing more seeds, so James assigned each marketer 20 acres and allowed them 1 ton of seeds, 10 times what would normally be needed. The object: create a dazzling display to show the world that Shady Seeds was back and blooming. So, Steve Stanford, Hannah Harvard, and Will Wharton hit their ground running. Contacting contacts from around the world, they each collected ideas for the most dramatic garden architecture. Colleagues from countries that were already facing food shortages often asked for some seeds, but Steve and Will figured they'd need everything they had to win the contest. Hannah, on the other hand, had a hard time hearing a need and not helping. so she'd often quietly ship some of her seeds on the side. Steve and Will both noticed how much she was giving away and silently smirked that she would never have enough to have a chance against them. As the last couple of weeks of the contest unfolded, Steve and Will were a blur of energy and motion. Tweaking water pressures and design lines, they labored to produce the grandest display of produce. Hannah, meanwhile, was pretty calm. She seemed very happy with how her design was coming together and spent much time reading and recontacting the colleagues she had collaborated with months ago. Steadily, folks from around the world returned her emails and wished her success. The reading and the return emails gave her a smiling sense of satisfaction. Contest day finally arrived, as did a small army of trucks, reporters, and cameramen from 12 different news outlets. James, a bit of a marketer himself, realized that if one dazzling display could splash them back into the market, what if 3 dazzling displays were unveiled at the same time? So he again made some calls and invited as many news agencies as he could find to witness the rebirth of a global brand. The competing plots were spaced far enough apart to offer some privacy during their design, so the spectating caravan was first steered to Steve. He ushered the entourage into a breathtaking display of beautifully landscaped fields, hills and valleys blessed by bountiful beans, broccoli, beets, Brussels big boy, and beefsteak tomatoes. Multiple acres laid out along the hilly banks of a river that wound its way from beyond the back of the property to a lush pond in the front. The creatively colorful collage evoked much applause as cameras clicked and captured the gorgeous scene. James applauded as well and then directed traffic in Will's direction. The assembled media circus was collectively convinced that they could never see a more amazing horticultural display than what they had just witnessed. But as they approached the next property, they were kind of overwhelmed. Will stood in front and introduced them to a huge space that was bordered by towering arched arbors, draped and covered with flowering sweet pea, red ripe tomato, and honeysuckle vines. He invited them in under the arbors where a 50-foot waterfall cascaded loudly into a river that highlighted the hilly garden scene, actually spelling out the words "shady seeds" as it meandered down into a large koi-filled pond. Many gasped as beautiful music accompanied the shady river rolling through acres of manicured gardens that were bursting with such life and color the eyes could barely take it in. You could almost hear singing as the privileged observers shouted and clapped their amazed approval. As James recovered his composure, he led the procession to the last plot to be judged. It was clear that this crowd of critics had crowned their winner, and Will was on his phone ordering his new VP business cards. Hannah was waiting as the caravan arrived. There were no towering arbors or gaudy garlands greeting them. Instead, the throng was quietly ushered between 2 giant hanging murals. They had to be 60 foot long and at least 30 feet high. On the one side, a beautiful garden picture from the mountainsides of Brazil, while on the other side, Scandinavian steppes showed small plots of brilliant blooms and blossoms. These led to a wide, gracious pathway between other giant murals, some depicting desert lands from Mongolia to Egypt, others revealing Canadian foothills and African savannas, but all with one common theme. There was at least one large, lush garden in them, with at least a dozen people smiling and waving. One after the other, the murals finally opened into an airy expanse surrounded by 30 or 40 of the now familiar international scenes. Only Steve and Will and James recognized that these gardens must all be from Hannah's seeds. And the murals? All enlarged pictures from all those returned emails. There was a large platform constructed near the opening of the expanse, and Hannah was at the steps inviting her guests to join her on the platform. When everyone was assembled on the platform, they looked out over the acres before them. In the center of all the murals, they saw a beautiful yet simple pattern. Though quite tiny compared to the overpowering displays that they had seen this day, the crowd was subdued, almost reverent, as they realized the simple, beautiful pattern of fruit bushes and vegetable plants spelled words that tied all the murals together, the message that revealed the hope of Hannah's heart. Almost as one, the group found themselves reading the living message aloud. Let's feed the world. We'll never know if Hannah planned all this from the beginning, or did the idea come to her after her seed supply sank so low that any more deluxe display would no longer be possible. We do have some idea of the satisfaction she sensed when she showed us some stories from the old black book she'd been reading, where another young man's red letters talked about seeds.